Here's what happens when war planners try to imagine an invasion of America. The simulation stops before any troops even arrive. And no, it's not just about the massive military power, the carrier fleets, or the nuclear arsenal. Here's the crazy part: even if the entire U.S. military vanished overnight, invading America would still be nearly impossible. The real secret? It's all about where America sits on the map. Mother Nature herself built the ultimate fortress when she created North America, and the United States controls the best defended piece of land anywhere on Earth. Let me show you why through the eyes of someone planning an attack. Think about what an invasion actually needs. You've got to transport millions of soldiers, heavy equipment, fuel, and food from your country to the target. For anyone trying to hit the U.S., that starting point is thousands upon thousands of miles away, separated by the Atlantic and Pacific, two absolutely massive natural barriers. Remember, Napoleon couldn't cross the English Channel, and neither could Hitler. That's a gap so narrow you can literally see the other side on a sunny day. Now picture trying to cross 3,000 miles of Atlantic Ocean from Europe, or a staggering 5,000 miles from Asia. Sustaining an invasion big enough to control even a small piece of America would require thousands of cargo ships making the journey every single day, without stopping for years on end. In our modern world of spy satellites and advanced missiles that can hit ships from hundreds of miles away, those supply convoys wouldn't just be at risk, they'd be floating targets with nowhere to hide. The same oceans that connected America to global trade become a watery graveyard for anyone trying to invade. But okay, let's imagine the impossible. Suppose somehow an enemy brings millions of soldiers across and hits the beaches. Now what? Where exactly do they step onto American soil? Here's the thing, the U.S. doesn't have any easy entry points. Try landing on the East Coast, and you're hitting densely packed cities from Boston down to Washington, D.C., but right behind that urban corridor, the Appalachian Mountains. Sure, they're not the world's tallest peaks, but they're covered in thick forests and create a maze of confusing terrain. They force any advancing army into narrow passages that are easy to defend. Your invasion force would get stuck fighting in the hills of West Virginia and Kentucky, dealing with guerrilla attacks, never even making it to America's interior. Think the West Coast looks better? It's actually worse. California, Oregon, and Washington have beaches that run straight into the Sierra Nevada and Cascade mountain ranges. There aren't many good harbors for massive landing operations, and the landscape shoots up into defensive high ground almost immediately. Land your troops in Los Angeles, and guess what? You're not really in America yet, you reboxed into a coastal area with mountain passes overhead that defenders could easily destroy and block with just a handful of people. What about coming through the neighbors? Could someone invade from Canada or Mexico? This is where America's massive size becomes a weapon. Up north, the U.S.-Canada border stretches farther than any other border on the planet, but it's mostly untamed wilderness. Moving a modern army with all its vehicles and equipment through the Yukon forests or the Canadian Shield would be a logistics nightmare. The roads and infrastructure simply aren't there to support moving millions of troops. Down south, the U.S.-Mexico border runs through the Sonoran and Chihuahuan deserts, some of the harshest landscape you'll find anywhere. We're talking 120-degree heat, zero water sources. Every army needs food and supplies, but tanks need fuel. A supply line stretched across hundreds of miles of exposed desert is a commander's worst fear. You'd be completely exposed. And even if you somehow crossed that desert alive, you'd run straight into Texas, which is basically its own fortress nation. This brings us to America's geographic ace in the hole. The Mississippi River Basin, the center of the United States, contains the world's largest connected area of farmable land. Connected by rivers that make shipping goods cheap and easy, this heartland makes America completely self-reliant. In an all-out war, the U.S. doesn't have to import food from anywhere. It doesn't need to import energy either, thanks to modern oil extraction. An invader can't starve America into submission. Cutting off trade wouldn't work because everything needed is already inside the country. Most nations collapse when their trade gets cut off. America could shut its borders tomorrow and survive indefinitely using only what's already here. This self-reliance gives American defenders the ultimate advantage. They can afford to wait. They can retreat inland, pulling back strategically, stretching the enemy's supply lines thinner and thinner until they break, while the invader slowly bleeds out trying to hold territory that's simply too enormous to control. Americans don't realize how massive their country really is. Europeans and Asians are shocked when they learn. The entire United Kingdom fits inside Michigan. All of Japan fits inside Montana. Invading the US isn't like invading France or Poland, it's like trying to invade an entire world. And we haven't even talked about the infrastructure yet. The roads, railways, and power systems weren't just built for everyday use, they were designed with war in mind. In the next part, we'll explore the logistical horror story. I'll show you how the interstate highway system was specifically designed as a military weapon, how America's rail network is a hidden defensive stronghold, and why the physical landscape of America's interior turns every bridge and tunnel into a deadly trap for attackers. Geography makes getting in nearly impossible, but let's say an enemy force has somehow landed 1 million troops on American beaches. They've secured their landing zone. This is where they hit America's second defensive layer, the infrastructure trap. Most people see the U.S. interstate highway system as a convenient way to drive across the country for holidays. Military strategists see something different, the Dwight D. Eisenhower National System of Interstate and Defense Highways. It was literally designed for World War III scenarios. But here's the catch for invaders. While the system allows fast travel, it also creates predictable choke points that can be exploited. The U.S. landscape is filled with bridges and tunnels. America has more than 600,000 bridges spread across the country. During a defensive war, every single bridge becomes a weapon in the defender's arsenal. If enemy forces are pushing up Interstate 95 from Florida, defenders don't need to meet them in direct combat. They simply destroy the bridges crossing the Santee River, the Cape Fear River, and the Potomac. Instantly, a modern mechanized army grinds to a halt. They become sitting targets on the highway, unable to advance while American artillery strikes rain down from above. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers specializes in this exact type of defensive demolition warfare. They can bring down a bridge in minutes. The invaders would need thousands of temporary bridges just to move a few hundred miles, something that is logistically impossible to transport across an ocean. Then you've got the rail system. America operates the world's most extensive freight railway network. It powers the entire economy. But unlike European or Asian systems, U.S. railways are spread out and have backup routes everywhere. There's no single central hub that, if destroyed, shuts down the entire country. Bomb the rail yards in Chicago? The freight simply reroutes through St. Louis or Kansas City. This built-in redundancy makes America's logistics incredibly tough to disrupt. Defenders can continuously move supplies, ammunition, and troops around the country, shifting forces from one coast to the other in just 48 hours. Meanwhile, the invader stays tied to their landing beach. The deeper they push inland, the longer their supply lines stretch, and the more bridges they need to rebuild. It creates an elastic defense strategy. The U.S. can give up ground temporarily, pulling enemies deeper into the trap until their logistics completely collapse. We also need to discuss energy. In World War II, the Allies defeated Germany largely by destroying their oil supplies. Invading the U.S. flips this equation completely. You're attacking the world's biggest oil and gas producer. Refineries, pipelines, and strategic fuel reserves dot the American landscape. An invading army requires enormous amounts of fuel. Where would they get it? They'd need to capture U.S. refineries without damaging them. But American defenders would almost certainly use scorched earth tactics on their own energy infrastructure. They'd shut down pipelines and sabotage refineries before pulling back. The invaders would be sitting on top of the planet's largest oil reserves but completely unable to access them, forced to ship fuel from across the ocean through submarine-infested waters. This brings us to the specific nightmare of fighting in cities. The United States is a country of suburbs and urban centers. Urban combat is the most brutal, costly type of warfare imaginable. It destroys armies, Stalingrad, Fallujah, Bakhmut. These battles prove that determined defenders in a city can hold off much larger forces for months. America has dozens of massive metropolitan areas. Imagine trying to clear New York City, Los Angeles, or Houston building by building. Skyscrapers turn into sniper positions. Subway systems become defensive bunkers. Sewage systems become supply routes. And unlike compact European cities with dense historic centers, American cities sprawl endlessly. A metro area like Atlanta or Phoenix stretches 50 miles in every direction. Invaders would need to clear thousands of square miles of shopping centers, residential neighborhoods, and industrial zones. Every house becomes a potential defensive position. Every dead-end street becomes a potential ambush point. The troops needed to occupy an American city are mind-boggling. Military experts say you need about 20 soldiers for every 1,000 residents to effectively control a hostile city. To occupy just New York City, with its 8 million people, an invader would need 160,000 troops. That's one city. To occupy America's top 10 cities, you'd need an army bigger than China's entire active military force. And that's assuming the population doesn't resist. Which brings us to the final, most frightening factor. The American population would absolutely resist. In the next section, we'll talk about the 393 million guns. We'll examine the unique factor that no other country on Earth possesses, a heavily armed civilian population owning more firearms than all the world's militaries combined. I'll explain why the math of this potential insurgency makes any occupation impossible, and why a Japanese admiral supposedly said, though it might be legend, that you cannot invade mainland America because there would be a rifle behind every blade of grass. The final and most decisive reason America cannot be invaded comes down to a quote often credited to Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Whether he actually said these exact words doesn't matter, the core truth remains the defining reality of American defense. You cannot invade mainland America. There would be a rifle behind every blade of grass. This isn't just patriotic talk, it's a statistical reality that creates an impossible math problem for any occupying force. The United States stands alone in human history. It's the only nation where ordinary citizens possess more firepower than their own military, and actually more weapons than all other world militaries combined. According to the Small Arms Survey, American civilians own around 393 million firearms. Let me put that in perspective. Russia's entire armed forces have roughly 30 million firearms. China's military has about 27 million. The U.S. military itself has approximately 4.5 million. Meanwhile, American civilians own nearly 400 million guns. That's more than one gun for every person in the country. It represents 46% of all civilian-owned firearms on the entire planet. If an invading force somehow defeated the U.S. Navy, Air Force, and Army, they wouldn't be walking into peaceful occupied territory. They'd be entering the largest, most heavily armed guerrilla battlefield in history. Let's examine the insurgency mathematics. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. military, the most powerful fighting force ever assembled, struggled for 20 years against insurgencies numbering in the tens of thousands. These fighters were often barely trained, using old AK-47s and homemade bombs. Now imagine an insurgency in America. Even if 90% of gun owners immediately surrendered, extremely unlikely given American culture that still leaves 10% as active fighters. That's approximately 8 to 10 million insurgents. That's an army larger than China, Russia, India, North Korea, and the United States active military personnel combined. And these wouldn't be poorly equipped fighters. The American civilian arsenal includes military-style semi-automatic rifles, AR-15 platforms, high-precision long-range scopes, thermal imaging equipment, and night vision technology. Plus, there's an entire subculture of preppers and shooting enthusiasts who stockpile ammunition. Estimates suggest trillions of rounds of ammunition sit in private hands across the U.S. An invading force would face a sniper in every window, an ambush around every corner, and an improvised explosive device on every road across a continent as big as Europe. Consider the hunting population. Every year, states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan issue hunting licenses. Wisconsin alone sends over 600,000 hunters into the woods for deer season. That army of Wisconsin deer hunters outnumbers Iran's entire active military. These are people who understand the terrain, know how to shoot accurately, know how to blend into their environment, and know how to survive in the wilderness. During an invasion scenario, the forests of Appalachia, the Rockies, and the Ozarks would become complete no-go zones. No supply convoy would survive passing through those mountains. Invaders would be trapped inside the secure perimeters of whatever cities they managed to occupy, effectively surrounded by a hostile countryside that wants them gone. This creates massive psychological pressure on the invading force. In normal warfare, you fight soldiers in uniforms. You know who your enemy is. In an American invasion, everyone is potentially the enemy. It could be the elderly woman in the farmhouse. It could be the office worker in the suburbs. It could be the construction guy in the pickup truck. This constant paranoia destroys occupying forces' morale. Every door they approach could be their last. Every vehicle they stop could be a trap. To control a population of 330 million people spread across 3.8 million square miles, where every third household is an armory, is simply not possible. There aren't enough soldiers in the entire world to do it. Some will argue that civilians can't fight tanks and drones. That's true in direct battle. Someone with an AR-15 can't stop an airstrike. But you can't occupy a country with airstrikes alone. To occupy, you need soldiers on the ground. You need troops standing on street corners. And a soldier on a street corner is vulnerable to rifle fire from 500 yards away. An insurgency's goal isn't winning battles. It's making the occupation so bloody and expensive that the invader gives up and leaves. The U.S. civilian population could inflict millions of casualties on an occupier without ever forming a traditional army. This reality serves as the ultimate deterrent. Foreign leaders know these numbers. The generals in Beijing and Moscow have studied the maps. They understand that invading the U.S. is like trying to swallow a porcupine whole. Even if you somehow get it down, it will kill you from the inside. The geography keeps them out. The infrastructure traps them, but the armed population destroys them. So, the United States stands as a fortress continent. It's defended by two massive oceans, a resource-rich interior, and a population that has turned the Second Amendment into a decentralized defense system. It's the only nation on Earth that can truly claim to be uninvadable. The real threat to the United States will never come from a foreign army marching on Washington. If America falls, it won't be murder, it will be suicide. It will come from internal division, economic meltdown, or political breakdown. But as long as the Pacific stays wide, the Appalachians stay steep, and the gun safes stay full, that flag will arguably never be replaced by a foreign one. Now let me be direct with you. We've covered how the Second Amendment shields the country from foreign invasion. But there's a darker chapter of history that most Americans don't know about. We assume our rights are rock solid. But back in 1933, the U.S. government decided that your property rights ended where their financial crisis began. Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102, confiscating the gold from every American citizen to rescue the banking system. It proved that when the government is desperate enough, the Constitution becomes just words on paper. In the next video, I'm going to reveal the complete, unfiltered story of the Great Gold Seizure. I'll expose the secret prosecutions, the loopholes wealthy people exploited to escape, and the terrifying legal precedent that allows the president to seize your Bitcoin, gold, and silver during a national emergency today. You need to know whether your safe is actually safe. Hit that like button to keep this message spreading, and subscribe so you don't miss the history of the gold ban. I'll see you in the vault.